In this short series of video recordings, I would like to discuss with you how we as educators, as teachers, can use generative artificial intelligence, or short gAI, in the classroom. What can we do in order to make sure that generative AI is actually useful for us and for our students? My name is Peter Klapper, and I would like to break up this session into 3 parts. In the first part, we can discuss why we should use artificial intelligence for our teaching and for learning. In the second session, we will look at the problems that can be caused by generative AI. And in the third session, I would like to discuss that in a little bit more detail with practical examples, how artificial intelligence can be used, and not just, let's say, ChatGPT, but also other models like Midjourney or whatever there is now in generative artificial intelligence. So, why is it important? Well, Goldman Sachs very recently published in a white paper an estimate of what could happen in the next 10 years, and they predict that it could drive a 7% increase in global GDP over the next 10 years. That's almost $7 trillion. And they also suggested in this paper that about maybe up to 300 million jobs will be directly or indirectly affected by artificial intelligence. So, in a way, it just makes sense to think about how we as teachers, as educators, can use generative artificial intelligence, and also to make sure that we think about it, how students might be benefiting from it. So, how can gAI be used? Well, there are lots and lots of different ways. I just thought of a few, and I actually asked ChatGPT to assist me with that. What can gAI be used for? For example, for students of all subjects, it can develop writing skills. So students can develop their writing skills in a vast variety of genres and styles. For example, we want students to write in a more formal style. Then there are ways how this can be done through generative AI, through ChatGPT. It's great fun if you do, for example, some biochemistry in the format of a poem. And this is really something that shows students how you can express yourself in different ways. It can also be used to give feedback on a particular writing style. So, for example, the student writes something and then asks the AI, what do you think about it? Give me feedback to it. Is it a good formal style, or is it too colloquial, or something like that? So, developing writing skills is certainly a very useful way of utilizing it. Of course, the generative AI, these large language models, can be used for translation of texts into different languages. I tried that with a comment or a text that a colleague of mine made in the Malaysian language, and I wanted to understand what this colleague is actually saying, but I also want to get an idea of the sentiment. Why was this person actually happy with the treatment by Malaysian Airlines in this case? And it turned out that I tried it with Google Translate and I tried it with ChatGPT, but ChatGPT gave me a much more in-depth and much richer idea of what this person was actually saying. We could use it for research. We can ask it to come up with some research ideas. There is, for example, a very interesting tool called illicit.org, which is an AI that is incredibly useful, for example, for if you want to come up with research questions. You can put in a research question, and it tells you what papers there are. So it's not like ChatGPT that makes up some papers, but it helps you to identify gaps in the knowledge. You can actually ask a language model to summarize complex texts or explore some data. So that's really useful, and for many students this is really a big issue that they struggle with. We can help students by using generative AI in practicing for exams. We know, for example, that one of the most powerful techniques is actually to do lots of practice questions. Now, I can generate lots and lots of practice questions for my students. I just simply ask the artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, give me 5 questions on a particular topic, on, let's say, the Krebs cycle or something like that. And I can give the students questions, and then they can write the answers and then put these answers into ChatGPT and get feedback, as we discussed previously. So we can generate example problems and solutions and test the knowledge of the students. It can also be adjusted and customized to the student's level of knowledge. So I can do that for my first year students, but I can do that also for my final year students, and enriching the learning experience with that. I just have to write the prompt in a slightly different format. This is great. I love that. You can ask the AI, ChatGPT, for example, to write code. Lots of my websites that I use for the students that I generate now have code snippets that have been written by the AI in, let's say, JavaScript or HTML. It can write Python, it can write R. Of course, you need to check that the code works, but you don't have to sit there and debug for or write the code for hours and hours and hours. You just let the AI write the code and then spend a little bit of time on debugging. We can use, of course, that as assistive technology for students with particular learning difficulties or disabilities. Or other challenges. So we can come up with ideas how they can do different ways of learning. For example, we can ask the AI to translate something from a video that we produced and check the translation for students who are partially sighted. And we can also use that for adaptive learning. Well, we recognize that learning is a very individual process, and everybody learns at a different speed. So what we can do is we can give additional, for example, questions or challenges to students who are more advanced in their learning skills and spend more time with students who need a little bit more time. And that is something that the generative AI can be used for. It can be used in conjunction with learning platforms. And we can utilize it by analyzing the student's performance and see where the student is and where there are threshold concepts. So these are all incredibly useful tools that we could utilize. And I'm sure we can think of a lot more ways how we can use generative AI in the classroom, as long as we use it. So it's all great, but now we need to look a little bit at what are potential problems here. So I call that things to think about. And of course, we need to be very clear. What we have here is just the start of the AI revolution. We are looking at something that was a little bit like, the second aeroplane. It's not perfect. And we need to be aware it is mainly it's based on large language models. So will it do maths very well at this stage? Probably not, because it is dealing with language. It is excellent in providing knowledge that has already been gathered. Is it good at being creative? Well, an AI doesn't understand creativity. That is something that comes from us. So what are the things that we have to be mindful of? Well, of course, it is a dependence on technology. And if students become overly reliant on these models, there is a real danger that they lose critical writing and communication skills. They still need to learn how to write, how to solve mathematical problems, how to solve problems, full stop. Some people say to me, well, you need internet connection. What are you going to do if you are in the middle of the Amazon rainforest? They don't have an internet connection. Well, let me put it this way. If you are stuck in the Amazon rainforest, you probably are not too concerned with finding out the different steps of glycolysis or applying the chain rule to something like. I think you have other problems then. So, but it is something that we need to talk about. There is bias in the models. The large language models have been trained on a huge corpus of data, but still it is biased. And of course, this corpus of data has been predominantly focused on text from the Western world. But we don't have much training on, for example, texts from, let's say, China or Africa. And because this training is so important for the AI, it will be reflected in the output. Students need to be aware that there are biases in it. Who owns it? Who owns the basically the information that has been given? The intellectual property concerns. Students may not be aware of the legal and the ethical issues involved in generating these texts. Now, the British copyright law, for example, says that the copyright applies to human-generated text. So, in a way, copyright does not apply to generative AI, although there are, again, loopholes. But we need to be mindful, and we need students to understand that there are potential problems. There are potential security risks, because when you feed an AI, when you write prompts into, let's say, ChatGPT, this is out there in the open, and it will be also used for further training of the models. So, for example, if you've got very sensitive data, then it would be very unwise, actually, to use, say, ChatGPT to do something with these sensitive data. For Apple, for example, stopped its workers of using artificial intelligence. They are not allowed to use, for example, ChatGPT, simply because of fear of leaks. And of course, we have ethical considerations. I mean, very clearly, it's what we said: privacy, bias, fairness. That's an interesting one. Those people who have access to ChatGPT and to have access to artificial intelligence, they will thrive. Other people who may not have access without being their own fault, they will be left behind. So AI has potentially there is the risk of dividing society. It will potentially be those who can use it and those who can't. And that can cause major problems. So these are actually some thoughts that we need to discuss with our students. How can we use artificial intelligence in a responsible manner? And I think that is really something that we need to very much discuss with them. So, but once we've done that, how can we be pragmatic and how can we implement it into our teaching? What should we do? What are techniques? What are practices that we can use? Again, I've asked ChatGPT come up with some suggestions, and I think it did a great job. So, for example, what I call explain the basics. What we can do is we can explain how generative AI actually works, how text can be generated, statistics, how statistical models are developed, how the pre-training works, and then we can discuss how it can be used in various contexts. So, for example, creative writing, translation, research, as I showed before. So we could have a very meaningful debate with our students how generative AI actually works. What is the background? How does it work? What are the limitations of it? So it's certainly a discussion that we should have with our students. We could demonstrate responsible use. How is the ethics really? How does that come into play? What are the limitations of the model? And how it can be used to communicate. We also need to be absolutely clear to the student that not everything that an artificial intelligence spitting out is actually correct. So if you try ChatGPT for solving some mathematical problems, you will find that it struggles. I had exactly this discussion with my students, and they were really evil because they tried to persuade ChatGPT that 2 times 5 equals 11. Of course, it's not 11, it's 10, but they were trying to, sort of do that just for a laugh, and they succeeded. And their argument was that at the beginning of the month of Ramadan, everything is different and everything needs every result has to be factored by 10% to make it correct. And eventually ChatGPT apologized and then gave them the result 2 times 5 equals 11. Was that ethical? I'm not entirely sure if you can prank an AI, but be mindful of that. So, but we could in the classroom demonstrate responsible use. When should you use AI? When is it not appropriate to use it? We could use it. We could demonstrate to the students how to do some critical analysis. Is this result that the AI gives us, is this correct? So this promotes critical thinking. And what we can do is we can start off with writing some prompts and then think about how we can refine these prompts and get to understand this process of how we can use an iterative process for developing their skills in, for example, prompt writing. There also has been an estimate that people who can write meaningful prompts and analyze them, there is a big job market now opening up with up to $300,000 being paid as a salary. So, I mean, if you earn that, that's wouldn't be a really good thing. What we need to do is we need to think about how we can incorporate generative AI into the curriculum. Lots of colleagues say, well, what can we do in order to avoid plagiarism, or how do we find out whether a student has actually used AI in writing an exam or coursework or something like that? If we are at that point where we ask, how can we find out? Then we are setting the wrong assessments. We need to include generative AI in our assessments, allow the students to play with these tools and make sure that they understand that this is something new. It's a little bit like, 50 years ago, people didn't have calculators, so we could set different assessments. But now we have unless we strictly prohibit a calculator in an exam, which I think then in this case makes me wonder, is this an authentic assessment? So what we need to think about is how we can incorporate AI into the curriculum, using as a tool to help students in their learning, explore new topics, go deeper. We, for example, say, here is, here is the topic of, let's say, a biochemical pathway. But we then can encourage the students to explore diseases that are related to this pathway. We can use that at a higher level to foster collaboration. So we can ask a group of students, you look at this particular biochemical pathway, and another student group, you look at the diseases. And by the end, you give a presentation about the combined results. Work together when using generative AI, discuss ideas, share feedback, and so on and so forth. So this can be incredibly powerful, and it can encourage students to collaborate and work together. And I think that is one of the skills that is incredibly useful in the future and sought after by employers. Practical tips for that? Well, one of the things is you need to understand how AI works, and you need to learn how to write prompts. That is absolutely essential. It's almost like garbage in equals garbage out. If you don't ask the right question, you don't get the right answer. And the more specific you are, the more successful will you be with your AI. There is this old programmer joke. Please go to the shop and buy 1 bottle of milk. If they have eggs, bring 6. So came home with 6 bottles of milk. And Why? Well, because they had eggs. So this instruction here was not clear. And that is what happens very, very often when people don't write good prompts. So what you can do is you can have a question answer session with the students in ChatGPT where you can give students a list of questions, or they come up with some questions and they try out what happens if I modify this prompt. I showed my students a little bit about how to write prompts, and I showed them something in a lesson. And they played around. And then one student during the session said to me, I noticed that the outcome is always the same. So I modified the prompt and now it is far more varied. Now that student, full marks, got exactly what I wanted them. Explore prompt writing. Have a look at what happens, how you can tweak the prompts. It's an incredibly useful learning tool. And again, it highlights the importance how to write prompts and analyze critically what you get out. Get these ideas, analyze the answers, analyze the prompts, and see how you can improve it. Be specific. Be as specific as possible. Provide context. So I very often tell the AI, you are a biochemistry professor, because that is what I'm teaching. Use natural language. And it's amazing how good, for example, ChatGPT is in interpreting natural language. How you speak. It makes sense of what you say, in most cases. You can use examples and say, here's an example how I want this output. For example, if you do programming, I want this as an JSON output, and that is what it should look like. Give me the answer to this question in this particular JSON output. And then test and refine. This is absolutely essential. You very often find these adverts for 1,000 prompts that work on Amazon books and things like that. Well, actually, you have to tailor your prompt to exactly the question that you want to answer. And I would say I do have a little bit of experience in prompt writing, but I never get it right the first time. But it's not a big problem because you can refine it as often as you like. And the AI doesn't care if you ask this similar question 20 times, it will give you an answer to it. You can use it as a research assignment. You can assign a research project where the students have to use artificial intelligence to find information and then put it into a coherent picture, put it into, for example, a research question, state the gap in the knowledge, and so on and so forth, and then perhaps come up with some ideas how they can actually address the project. You can ask the students to transform a problem into a code snippet. So here the creative point is for the students to think about what does my code have to look like, and then ask the AI to write the code. And of course, the proof is in the pudding. Does the code work at the end? And here you've got a combination of ideas, basically, creativity plus the use of AI. You can even go further for really good students, or if you've got project-based learning, to create a dialogue system. Now, lots and lots of AI systems are currently springing up. Wherever you go, there are now, every day, there are God knows how many new AI tools coming up. And if you know a little bit of Python and LangChain, you can create your own AI system for a particular task. One of my postgraduate students is currently working on an AI system relevant to the topics that I teach. So it can be even really specific, and you can ask the students to build a dialogue system. So what you hopefully have seen is that we need to have the discussion about AI, and it's really important to understand that AI is here to stay. What I have given you here was just a brief overview of things that you can think about. And I have to admit, I asked ChatGPT to come up with these ideas. And I think it did a decent job. Of course, you can think of a lot of other things, but that's now up to you. Now, people say to me, will AI actually kill my job? And I don't think it will. AI won't replace teachers or educators, but teachers who use AI will replace those who don't. So with these thoughts, I better stop now, and thank you for listening to me, and I would be very happy to hear your views and take your questions. So thank you very much.